Welcome and greetings everyone from Columbia Business School in New York City, or should I say greetings from Westeros, because we have a very special webinar for you today, Leadership Secrets Through Game of Thrones. So, my name is Stephanie Boyd, and before I introduce our speaker, Bruce Craven, I want to go through some general logistics for the webinar. First, a recording of the webinar will be sent to you after we finish. If you're going to tweet about the webinar, please use the hashtag CBSExecEd. And finally, we encourage all questions, and if you are submitting questions, please use the Q&A box on your screen. Bruce and I will get to as many questions as we can during the last 10 minutes. So now it is my pleasure to introduce my friend, my colleague, Bruce Craven. Bruce is a member of the Executive Education faculty at Columbia Business School. He's also the program director for the Advanced Management Flagship Program, as well as the faculty director for a number of our custom programs. Bruce also teaches a wildly popular elective course for the MBA and Executive MBA classes, Leadership Through Fiction, and his new book, Win or Die, Leadership Secrets from Game of Thrones, comes out today. So thank you, Bruce, for joining us, and welcome to the studio. Let's dive right in and talk about Daenerys Targaryen as a metaphor for leadership.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm very excited to be here. We're going to talk about Daenerys Targaryen, one of the most loved, respected, and thought about characters in Westeros and Essos, in George R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones and the HBO show, which many of us are wonderfully addicted to and looking forward to the next season.
Absolutely.
There's a significant moment in the show where Daenerys says to her people, her followers, I'm not going to stop the wheel, I'm going to break the wheel. And what she means is that there's this history of powerful families crushing the vulnerable, crushing the disenfranchised and the downtrodden. And Daenerys has decided that her purpose is to stop that, is to transform the way the vulnerable are being taken advantage of. We're going to talk about selecting advisors, operating with emotional intelligence, contextual intelligence, and building followership.
That's great. Sounds like lofty goals for Daenerys and for us to discuss today. So let's talk about, where does it all begin? How does she get to breaking the wheel?
Great question. When we start our journey with Daenerys, her advisor, I guess the closest thing she has to an advisor initially, is her brother Viserys. Viserys is arrogant, he's a bully, he physically abuses her, and he forces her into a marriage that honestly frightens her. Under the agreement from Magister Illyrio Mopatis that the Dothraki will become an army and support Viserys's claim as the ancestor of the Mad King. So an opportunity for the Targaryens to retake the Iron Throne. Daenerys sees in her brother his vanity. She sees that he's easily flattered, but she commits to this marriage that is required of her. And she enters a culture, Stephanie, it's terrifying to her. It's violent, it's visceral. She doesn't understand the language. They're nomadic. She's basically lived her life with her brother kind of as these expat Targaryens being taken care of by Mopatis, and suddenly she's thrust into this new culture.
And she sees the kind of combative way that Viserys deals with the Dothraki and, his leadership styles there at play.
Well, Viserys, her brother, is convinced that he deserves this army and he deserves the Iron Throne. And he's very disrespectful to the Dothraki, and he's very arrogant, and he's filled with assumptions about what he deserves. Daenerys, on the other hand, enters this culture. Well, we should say at her marriage, in addition to processing all of it that scares her about the culture, she's also given these dragon eggs, which she's very curious about. And she's very open to. So what happens when she enters this Dothraki culture is that she chooses to adapt. She chooses to, rather than her brother be offended by something she doesn't understand, she chooses to embrace it. She learns to ride the white stallion that her husband Khal Drogo gives her on their wedding day. She learns to ride on this Dothraki saddle, which is very difficult. She puts herself through kind of real challenges to embrace the culture, wear their clothes, learn their language. She learns from her Dothraki handmaidens. She even builds partnerships with some of the Dothraki warriors who see in her a leader who's embracing their culture as opposed to judging it negatively as her brother does. So
it sounds
please.
like Daenerys is really embracing the yes and ethos, and it's great to see that she's building relationships not only with her peers and the same people on the same royal plane as her, but it's really important to see her dealing with her subordinates and giving them the respect and giving them opportunity to teach her things as well.
Yes, and a great point, because she takes this same capacity to embrace people that are sort of lower in status. Once she becomes Khaleesi, the people that report to her, she treats with respect. And she takes that same insight all through her journey after the Dothraki, when she goes to Slaver's Bay, when she eventually goes to Dragonstone and returns to Westeros. And on the way, she practices emotional intelligence, and she has to face a number of very brutal challenges. We see her when she enters the Dothraki. One of her advisors that's not a Dothraki is Jorah Mormont, who really is a good advisor to her, although later she will find out that he had his own deceptions and she will have to come to terms with that. Let's talk about EQ, Stephanie.
Okay.
So there's 4 categories of EQ. EQ, the acronym for emotional intelligence. So it's something that over the years in the business education world has become very impactful. People realize that if you operate with EQ, you tend to have a much higher level of chance of succeeding. So the first category of EQ is self-awareness. So that's, what do you see in yourself? What do you learn and recognize about yourself? How do you understand your reactions and your tendencies? A related segment to self-awareness is self-management. So that's what happens when you see things in yourself and then you learn to manage them. Okay? The fourth category is social awareness, and that's the ability to what you see in other people, sort of what you pick up in the people around you in terms of what matters to them, and then that supports your ability to function with relationship management and build relationships with different people. Now, when Daenerys, Stephanie made this great point about how Daenerys empowers the people that are disenfranchised. Now, there's a moment when she's with the Dothraki where they have defeated the Lazarene, a less aggressive people, and they're treating them poorly. And Daenerys saves a Lazarene healer, a religious figure, Muri Maz-Dur, who is also known as sort of a magi. And Daenerys feels like she's doing the right thing. She saves this woman, and the woman volunteers to help heal Daenerys' husband when he's wounded in battle. The Dothraki don't want to trust the Lazarene healer, but Daenerys has this instinct to trust the vulnerable, and she insists that the Magi be allowed to try to treat her wounded husband.
How does that work out for her?
For fans of the show, of which Stephanie and I are both clearly fans, it does not work out well. It has tragic results, and she loses both her husband, who she's madly in love with, and their unborn son. So Daenerys is in a situation where she could choose to never trust anyone again that's vulnerable, but instead she operates with self-awareness. She realizes that at that moment she trusted the wrong person. It doesn't mean should never trust anyone that's in a vulnerable position, but at that point she was too willing to accept the support of someone too quickly who it turned out she couldn't trust. So she recognizes that she can't trust everyone, even if they're vulnerable, yet she continues to push herself to recognize when she can trust people and to not trust too easily. She also uses social awareness and relationship management when she moves forward into Slaver's Bay.
So setbacks, tragedies, inevitably they occur, but it's how she learned and how she grew from that and how she relied on her knowledge and her emotional intelligence to move forward and be more guarded, but still open going forward.
Yeah, very nicely said. And all of the characters in Game of Thrones, the key characters, are almost all thrust into worlds where their lineage has impact even as they arrive. So in her case, she is the, expat daughter of a famous king, and this impacts how everyone treats her. Also, many of the characters, we could think of Arya Stark, all the way down the line, get dropped into foreign environments that they have to learn to understand. And for Daenerys, one of the things that's interesting is that she's continually dropped into these foreign, difficult, confusing, frightening, threatening environments, and she continues to use EQ to find her way forward in that. When she's at Slaver's Bay, Jorah Mormont, who she had banished, returns with a Lannister, Tyrion Lannister, and the Lannisters had slaughtered her remaining family after she escaped during Robert's Rebellion, or the War of the Usurper, depending on which term you use. And so it'd be very easy for Daenerys to see Tyrion as an enemy.
Yeah, say, I made that mistake already. I'm not going to do it again.
Right. And yet, an interesting moment happens. Tyrion speaks to her honestly. He admits his own flaws, yet he pushes her to see the truth about how he could be a resource for her. He makes it clear, when you take your dragons and you take your unsullied army and you get to Westeros, you could use an advisor who understands that world. And I am that advisor. So he makes his case that she should consider not sending him back to the fighting pits of Meereen, where we know he won't survive, but rather accept him as an advisor. And as Stephanie points out, she's been burned that way before, but she's also learned that if she can control herself through EQ, she can gain good advisors. And at this point, she has Grey Worm from the Unsullied. She has Missandei, who was her translator, who she liberated from slavery. She's benefited as much as she also, at a certain point, suffered. And so she chooses to name Tyrion Hand of the Queen.
So even though she is taking a bit of a risk with Tyrion, she still now has amassed enough advisors and enough loyalty behind her that she feels comfortable taking those risks because it's less damaging than it was when she first started.
Yes, and what is going to happen as we go forward and she moves into Westeros, into Dragonstone, and confronts those challenges, is that her advisors won't always be right. There's a moment where Tyrion gives her a very specific plan that in the Chamber of the Painted Table, and Daenerys and her team accept this plan relatively quickly without a lot of evaluation and pushback. And Olenna Tyrell says, I've known a lot of smart men and I buried them all. You're a dragon, be a dragon. And so Daenerys is sort of operating with this tension of when to practice these developmental leadership moments like EQ and when maybe it will be time to be a dragon.
That's great. And I guess that takes us to some other things that Daenerys is picking up along the way. So it's not just about emotional intelligence, but also about contextual intelligence and understanding her surroundings. And let's talk more about that.
Thanks, Stephanie. If you go to the first season when Ned Stark enters King's Landing, he called it a sort of a nest of snakes, a nest of adders. And he had heard from King Robert that he shouldn't trust anyone in this environment. He enters the environment and he's distrusting, but what he doesn't practice is really building his contextual intelligence. He's entering a new environment. There's a new context. It's not Winterfell. There are different things at play. And he had a moment of taking the opportunity to try to learn the environment he was going into, and he didn't do that. Daenerys is incredibly effective at entering these different environments and learning, right? So one way to look at contextual intelligence is that it's the building of knowledge. It's not just facts and data washing over you, but it's taking that, reflecting on it, and extracting from it knowledge. So there's 4 categories. And by the way, I would recommend after this webinar that you take these 4 categories, look at your current professional work life, your social life, your family life, and answer these questions for yourself. And it will give you a lot of insight into what you can do to leverage more successful leadership in your own life. So self-knowledge is knowing your values and beliefs. It's your needs, it's what fulfills you and what challenges you. Social network knowledge is that information that flows around you from friends, colleagues, direct reports, customers, and people in your world. Organizational knowledge is the culture, the workplace, all of the organizations that impact you, universities, religions, companies, social groups, that sort of thing. And stakeholder knowledge is the history, thoughts, and needs of those who depend on you, your stakeholders.
Great. So it's really interesting to see that as Daenerys is moving through her own journey and her physical world is expanding, so too is her worldview. She's not only thinking inside of herself, but she's really beginning to understand and to analyze those around her and how they can support her, but also how she can support them, and they just have a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, and I think that comes from a willingness continually to try to understand new environments and to not fall back on the comfort of arrogance or deception. She saw with her brother what could happen when you were flattered. Her brother was flattered by Illyrio Mopatis, who said, oh, people in Westeros, they silently sew dragon banners in your honor and they raise toasts in your name. And Viserys bought into it, right? And Daenerys doesn't accept flattery, and she pushes herself to see past that, right? To understand new worlds, and contextual intelligence is part of that. So if we look at self-knowledge through the course of the journey, there's many points we could come up with, but at one point she realizes, or at least she has a strong confidence that she'll be able to withstand fire, which is an unusual skill. She has the courage to put that insight into action. She takes risks all through her journey. There's a moment where she has been recaptured by the Dothraki and sent to the home or the place where all the Khaleesi's that don't have husbands anymore are supposed to live out their days, and she doesn't put up with it. She fights and she escapes. Her social network knowledge, she's earned the commitment of the Unsullied and other groups that have been marginalized. She's worked to kind of build alliances and really has created her brand, the Mother of Dragons. Organizational knowledge, she attempts to use her dragons for good. I mean, they're a very powerful part of her skill set. And she's trying to get longer-term victory. Now, when she's in Meereen, she recognizes that the fighting pits, culturally something she doesn't agree with, are actually sort of an organizational piece of knowledge she might need to leverage to gain the support of people in that area. Stakeholder knowledge, she listens to various stakeholders and also travels later in the show into high-risk environments that she would not be expected to, say, for example, when she goes beyond the wall, and as we mentioned earlier, when she listens to Olenna Tyrell. So she's continually listening to different stakeholders and trying to extract knowledge from that.
Great. So those are all really valuable points in Daenerys' journey. Kind of quickly, how does that play out for her community and how the people who follow her? Does that inspire leadership? What do they think of this?
Well, I mean, the most famous line is on Dragonstone when Missandei says, she is the queen we chose. We don't follow her because she's related to some famous previous leader and there's some legacy that we're expected and obligated to follow. We selected her. At the Columbia Business School, we talk about the importance in leadership of building the choice of your followers to follow you. And Daenerys is incredibly effective at doing that. She proved herself by continuing to take personal risks in her effort to fulfill her commitment to her followers. She also finds the capacity, this is important, to be comfortable by entering new environments and leading her team to success over difficult challenges. She operates, this gets back to that flattery she saw with her brother Viserys, she operates with tough empathy, demanding that her advisors, Tyrion and Varys, for example, face her with courage and honesty. She can accept honesty, and in fact, she demands honesty, and if she feels she doesn't get it, that's when she's very critical of potential advisors. And here's another thing. Unlike Cersei, she does not hide in a castle. Her purpose is to break the wheel, and her followers see her put herself in risk continually in an effort to deliver that goal to her followers. They join her, and they risk their lives by crossing the narrow sea to go to Westeros to continue this battle for a cause that she represents and they know benefits her. So very quickly, I'll just jump into values. Her personal values, I would say the fifth up to the fifth, the one maybe at the lowest of her hierarchy is equality. Paul Ingram has done a wonderful podcast on values. You might want to watch that. Adam Galinsky's done a wonderful one that relates to Tyrion. Well, it relates to speaking to power. In terms of values, equality. Daenerys cares about that. She tries to treat everyone equally. Responsibility from the beginning. She's taken the responsibility to be a leader. Courage, as we said, she's continually stepping into courage. And power, she understands she has to have or she won't achieve her goals. But her top value is freedom. Freedom is what she wants to deliver to her people, and freedom is what we see on her when she gets on her dragon. And after Tyrion's plan didn't work out and she's frustrated in Westeros, she gets on her dragon and she decides to ride her dragon and fight. One of the things about Daenerys is she can extract all the leadership learning possible, and at the same time, she knows when it's time to act. And so our advice from our love of learning from Daenerys is operate with EQ, operate with contextual intelligence, inspire your people through your actions and your authenticity, and when it's time to act, ride dragons.
Ride dragons. What a great message to leave us on. So Bruce, we've had a lot of good questions come in during the first part of this webinar, so let's get to answering some.
Cool.
So first of all, Amanda asks, what's the value to exploring leadership models and hero arcs such as Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey?
Well, the book that I've written uses Joseph Campbell's 17-stage structure all the way through it as a kind of a foundation to look at the different characters in Game of Thrones and to connect leadership lessons. The power in looking at those models is that if you take someone like Joseph Campbell, he extracted themes from a whole variety of different myths and stories and religious histories, and he compiled them into a simple model that we can look at to drive ourselves to confront adversity. And to me, one of the most powerful things about these models is that we ourselves are in challenging moments where we have to decide, am I going to get off the couch, put down my devices, and go fight for something I care about? Am I going to ride dragons? And to do that, we often need inspiration, and these story structures can give us a way to look at our challenges and push ourselves past the things that scare us, past the things that aren't easy. And most of our life is going to be faced by moments that aren't easy. And if you care about something, you need to embrace that. And these stories and myths help support that.
Great. And talking about your values is also just another way to kind of have that strength within you to lean back and as you're fighting these dragons or riding the dragons. So we have another question.
It's probably going to be both for her,
yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah, for those who know what's coming. So we have another question. Samantha's asking, in your presentation, you've discussed how EQ is essential for strong leadership principles. Can you address how Dany's position as a female leader influences her power? In addition, how does she use her position as a woman to interact in her favor as it relates to her ambition and plays for more power?
So say the last part again?
Sure. So in addition, how does she use her position as a woman to play interactions into her favor and in relation to her ambition and plays for more power?
Wow, that's like a whole chapter of a book. It's such a great question. My sense of it is that one of the things Daenerys learns very early on is that it gets back to this point of how all the characters kind of carry the history of their family legacies, and they benefit from recognizing that. And she benefits from recognizing that no matter what she does, she is seen as a Targaryen. She is judged as a Targaryen. And she is seen as an ex-Khaleesi, and she is judged as an ex-Khaleesi. She eventually is seen as the woman that frees the slaves in Meereen, and she's judged by that. And to her credit, one of the things she does is she embraces it. She enters each culture, and in kind of what might seem like a superficial way, although I don't think it is, she wears the clothes of that culture. She presents herself as a powerful figure. She takes responsibility to try to learn from everyone around her. She leverages herself as a female source of responsibility and leadership authority. And she doesn't feel that she clearly feels she earns what she's achieved. And I think because of that, she becomes the mother of dragons, and people rally behind her because she exhibits confidence. And it's a very authentic confidence. It's not, even though she's embracing the different cultures, she sort of makes it all her own.
Great. Well, on that note, we have Carl who asks, if you don't have Targaryen blood in your veins, how do you build that confidence as a strong leader?
You're out of luck. No, I think it's important to look at Daenerys and recognize that when she has the insight that fire won't hurt her, she leverages that, okay? And she steps into the fire and the dragon eggs hatched. But that doesn't mean that her life then becomes some easy walk in the park as a leader. She takes more responsibility on for her, and she continues to face more and more challenges. I would suggest all of us have some version of Targaryen blood. We have some skills and advantages that if we can recognize them, you know, maybe it's our ability very naturally to operate with EQ. Maybe it's a certain cognitive, maybe it's strength. There's things we have, and if we can identify what they are and leverage them, our challenges are still going to be intense if we're expecting a lot of ourselves. But maybe the way to look at it is, what is my Targaryen blood? You know?
Yeah, nicely said. So one question that comes in is, what is the lucky factor in all of these achievements? Some other characters within the show have had similar skill sets, but haven't made it this far, while others have gotten lucky enough to pursue their destiny and their beliefs and goals. So how much is it luck versus that EQ, self-knowledge, contextual knowledge, and then ability to take action?
Well, I think EQ, for example, and contextual intelligence both build your luck. They, in Daenerys' case, helped create moments for her to see opportunity that she might not have seen. Her brother didn't see the opportunity of the Dothraki. He saw the Dothraki as some inferior group that was supposed to give him what he wanted. And he didn't act with EQ, and it cost him his life. Ned Stark didn't see Varys in King's Landing as a potential resource. He judged him on his clothing, and he judged him on his reputation, and he lost a great ally. So I would say that operating with contextual intelligence and emotional intelligence is a wonderful way to increase the chance that luck will fall your way.
Great. So in talking about all of the leadership models and the people that Daenerys interacts with who've become mentors to her, both good and bad, this kind of leads us to the question from Bethany. How do you ask someone to be your mentor? And I assume that the answer is not just go up to someone and say, will you be my mentor?
Well, I know I'm going to want to hear your thoughts on this too, Stephanie. I know early in my life, I tried a few of the, hey, would you be my mentor? And it didn't really work so well. What I did learn, I guess one of the benefits of carrying on and being a little older in life is you can look back at things you learned. What I did learn was that I often had mentors who were around me, and I needed to choose to embrace them. I needed to kind of be attentive in my environment to when people were offering to help me. Arya Stark, to me, is a fascinating character because she finds mentorship. Of course, she pursues it aggressively by entering the House of Black and White, but she also finds it from the Hound. She finds it from people all around her. She even finds it during a brief period where she's serving Tywin Lannister. So I actually use Arya in my mind as a kind of a reminder of the fact that mentorship can be everywhere. It doesn't even fundamentally have to be goodwill in your favor, although that's ideal. So I would say looking for the mentors that are out there, being very open-minded, and I know another idea, not falling into a preordained assumption that your mentor needs to be at a specific point in a specific organization. Look for the people that are actually offering you help, and often they're going to be the ones that have a real emotional, intellectual commitment to support you.
Great, and I think Daenerys has been a great example of that, not dismissing people because they were of lower stature to her, because they weren't taken seriously by others, but really embracing all of those around her.
Yeah, very nice.
Perfect. So Bruce, on that note, we want to thank you for a great webinar. We once again want to congratulate you on the release of your book, Win or Die, Leadership Successes Through Game of Thrones. And thank you everyone for your time.
Thank you so much.